about all of this amazing stuff you have right here.
Hi there, can everybody hear me okay?
Yeah, can everybody hear him okay?
We can hear him.
All right, perfect.
Great, well, thanks. My name is Sam. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit today. Our program is about weaponry, hunting, and blacksmithing in early colonial America. So the first thing I'd like to talk to you a little bit about is just setting the stage for colonial America in general. So before Europeans even got here, certainly was quite a bit of hunting, various kinds of weapons here in North America in general when you talk about the eastern woodland Indians that lived in this part of the country. We talk about eastern woodland Indians, talking about a large group of people, a variety of nations and tribes living between what's now Canada and Florida, and really from the banks of the Atlantic Ocean to the Mississippi River. So there are a number of different groups in there speaking a few different languages, all living in pretty similar circumstances. First and foremost, almost all of those people are farmers, so they're growing things like corn, beans, and squash and other vegetables, but they're also going to need meat, right? So they're going to be doing a good bit of hunting as well. The tools that they're using, both for hunting and for other tasks, usually going to be made out of two main materials, one of them being wood, the other being stone. So if you look here, we have a spear, which would be used pretty typically in hunting. That is a stone point. Usually these are made out of chert or flint. Very workable material. You can nap it, meaning break off pieces to make it good and sharp. In fact, when you talk about flint can actually be made sharper than steel can in a number of different cases. And Eastern Woodland Indians, very proficient, very good at actually that napping practice. It's something that humans have done for thousands of years. But so as far as their hunting tools, probably the most common tool that you would see an Eastern Woodland Indian hunter using is right here, a bow. So this is going to be their longest range tool in many cases, something they can use to hunt a whole number of things here in this part of Virginia, hunting big game like deer, sometimes things like elk, even bear and buffalo in this part of Virginia, but also smaller game, things like rabbits, perhaps squirrels, raccoons, and also using that to hunt against predatory game as well, things like foxes, catamounts, or what you'd call a mountain lion today. So this is a tremendously important tool, tremendously important weapon for these people. For arrows, pretty similar to what you'd think an arrow might look like. That one doesn't have a point. So arrows like so. Another flint napped tip. This can get good and sharp. You see, depending upon the group and the tribe, different designs of arrows. This one, pretty typical. This is made out of a river reed. So it's good, light, so it'll go a little bit further. It's also sort of beneficial in that these reeds grow good and straight, which is tremendously important. If your arrow's not straight, it's not going to go where you want it to go. So at one end we had the flint, the other end we have the fletching, that'd be the European term for it. These feathers, which are imparting direction, making sure that it stays on a nice stable trajectory. These I think are made out of turkey feathers, but you see different groups using all sorts of different feathers here in North America. So these tools are going to be pretty important for hunting, also something these people certainly are using in warfare. Warfare is going to be pretty common sort of throughout most of human history. Certainly it's the case with Eastern Woodland Indians as well. You have various groups vying for dominance or trying to be the controlling group in an area, and they'll use a variety of tools while they're fighting in order to do that. Certainly the bow and arrow is one. They'll also use some more close combat tools, things like this. We know this today as a tomahawk. It's also a stone head. This one's not very sharp at the moment. These could get perfectly good and sharp. Are going to be very effective tools at close range. The other thing we see, and these can sometimes be very ornately done, are war clubs. So you get a good bonk on the head with a war club, probably not going to want to fight anymore that day. These can be very effective tools. So the important thing to take note of when you talk about a lot of these tools, very effective. Eastern Woodland Indians have been living and hunting and surviving in North America, and many times thriving, for thousands of years before Europeans ever came here. And their tools can be tremendously effective as a result of that. Underneath, we see sort of the main thing that they are hunting. So this is a deer hide. tremendously important both for warmth, but also for clothing. What Eastern Woodland Indians would commonly do is take that hide, shave the fur off, and make what's called buckskin. So buckskin, very good, durable, a little bit stretchy material. They're using this to make moccasins, but also some of their clothing. So if I back up a little bit today, I'm dressed from the waist down in what was called Indian dress. I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But in general, moccasins made out of buckskin, leggings, which before Europeans would also be made out of buckskin, and a breech clout, which would be made out of buckskin. The stuff that I'm wearing, mostly made out of wool cloth. That's something that Europeans will introduce to North America. And we'll talk a little bit more about that and trade a little bit later on. But certainly the biggest contribution once Europeans come and start colonizing and settling in North America is the introduction of this very important resource, metal. Some of these Eastern Woodland Indians are playing with metal a little bit, things like copper, but harder metals like this, steel or iron, this is something that really Europeans are introducing to North America. And we're going to go over to our blacksmith where he can talk a little bit more about that.
All right, guys, I'm going to pause you for just a second so we can get the mic pack over. We'll be with you in just a minute. All right, guys, this is Mark, and he's going to teach you a little bit about blacksmithing.
Alrighty, good morning, everybody. Can you all hear me?
Yeah, we can.
All right. So let me again welcome you here to the Frontier Culture Museum. My name is Mark, and today I'm going to be talking to you a little bit about blacksmithing. Now, we're right here in front of our Irish forge. This is the type of forge you would have found in Northern Ireland during the time period. We're looking in the mid-1700s. What I have set up here is a portable outdoor forge. This is probably a little less common than what you would have found inside a small town or outside in farming communities. But what you're seeing here is something probably a little bit more reminiscent in the Army. Something that would have been a portable forge that would have been able to travel with the Europeans as they were traveling around. At the very bottom, we have a bellows, which is a big bag that fills up with air. The air comes through piping in the back and then comes into the coal that I'm burning. The coal here is going to be several thousand degrees in which to heat up the iron or steel that we'll be working with. Now, iron is a naturally occurring metal. Steel is an alloy where you add carbon to iron. And the varieties of steel go from very low-grade carbon steel all the way to a very high-grade carbon steel. It really depends on how much carbon you're adding into that iron ore. Now, I have a piece of metal here in the fire. As you can see, it heats up nice and hot. This is several thousand degrees. And I can use my anvil and hammer to help shape it. And as it loses that red coloration, I would have to put it back in the fire to heat it back up. Now, what I'm going to do today is I am going to be making a hook for us all. We'll be starting with this part right here. So that first part, what I was doing is I was tapering and narrowing it down. Once I've narrowed it a little bit more, I'll then begin the process of rounding it. Now, iron metal, when it's heated up, it's a lot like working with clay or Play-Doh. It becomes moldable and movable. The big difference is you can burn yourself with it. But if you've ever tried moving clay or Play-Doh with a little paddle, that's very much what it's like trying to work with the metal here. All right, so I've now gotten that. I've put a little bend in it. Well, let me put the bend out. And then my next step is going to be, I'm going to be striking the corners of that square metal, turning it first into an octagon, and then continuing to strike the corners to round it out. One more. Give it a second more. Now I'm going to use these smaller blows. And you can see it's starting to get rounder. A few more telling blows to give it a bit more point. And there we go. How old are y'all?
4th grade.
4th grade. All right. So, kids about your age are going to be starting to learn this process as an apprentice. Now, if this was a family business, many of them were, that means you would be learning the jobs of your parents. So starting at about your age, you would have been coming into the shop, helping to learn the basic skills for what's going to be your lifelong profession. Now, here in Northern Ireland, during the mid-17 and early 1700s, when you start having a couple of famine years where crops fail, and you start having rents beginning to go up, you're going to see a number of these folks, including some of the craftsmen like the smith here, are going to start to pick up and move into the New World. And that's where the immigration coming into the New World is coming from. Now I'm going to start, bent it over, and I put that curl onto it. Now I'm going to straighten it back out, and then back into the fire. Now this next time, I'm going to start hitting it again, but I'm going to, before that, put it into my bucket of water right here to cool the tip, because I no longer want to have the tip of it bending, just the rest of the metal. And then as you can see at this point, I've put that hook right onto the metal. Now, the next step that I'm going to have, there we go, is I'm going to heat this up again a little bit further up, and I'm then going to cut the metal on my hot cut right here. So this time I'm not trying to heat up the end, I'm trying to heat it up a little bit more in the middle. So it's going to take a second longer to heat up that part of the metal. Because at this point, that area is not particularly hot, unlike the tip of the metal was, which I've been working up to this point. And once I break it off, then I'm going to have to start using tongs to hold it onto the metal so that I don't burn my hand. So far, are there any questions?
Yeah, any questions, you guys?
No. How do you do that?
What are you asking how they do, Marley?
How do you?
Take this off.
How do you curl that?
Well, he just showed you how to curl it.
Emily, you're going to want to back away.
Oh,
They all really like it. They said that they want to do that job. They want to try it out themselves.
do you enjoy doing it?
I'm sorry, honey, I couldn't hear you. Say that again.
She said, do you enjoy doing it?
Yeah, she asked, do you really enjoy doing it?
I do. I really do enjoy this. I've been working at a number of different museums now for over 15 years. So just like your teacher went to school to be able to teach you guys, I actually went to school and got a master's degree in museum studies and early American history. So yeah, no, I love doing this.
Yeah. Do you guys have any other questions?
That's cool.
So now I'm grabbing a slightly different pair
Fire.
of tongs.
Was that a question? I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you.
No, they just said it was really cool.
Oh, okay. Go ahead.
So if you see the difference here, these flat tongs versus the nail rod tongs. So you can actually see there's a groove in the middle. That's going to make it a lot easier for me to grab the metal and hold it into the fire. Where the other ones were really good at taking it and giving me the leverage I needed to twist. All right, and now I'm going to start heating it up. Now, while it's on there, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to add more fuel to the fire.
Ooh.
Now, I'm using coal today as my fuel source, but there are also a couple of others. You could have used wood charcoal, or in the Scots Irish here in Northern Ireland, would have been using peat moss charcoal, which is a different type of fossil fuel. Oh, and my tongue. I also may have bent them slightly last time I used them. And back into the fire it goes. Now, this part's taking me a bit longer, in large part because it's a lot harder to hold on to the tongs and keep the metal in a tight grip so it doesn't move than it was doing so with my bare hands. But I need to do it this way so that I don't accidentally burn myself. Do it a little more. There we go. All right, so I've just about got it there to this little point. I'm going to hit it once or twice more just to straighten it out. And at that point, after I would have to reheat it up here, I would then have that hook that I'd had before. And we would be, at that point, we would have the same kind of hook. I've got a good time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
So what you see right now, I'm shouldering this. I'm going to taper it out. And that's what I'm going to be doing here with my next strike. I dropped my mic. I have. Sorry about that, guys. All right, does that sound good for you guys?
Yeah, is his mic okay?
It is good.
All right, thank you.
Not a problem. Sorry about that. I think I got it hooked on the billows right here, and it pulled it off. Last part, I'm going to get that twist out of it.
We had a question about the
So what I'm
anvil.
going to be doing for this part is I'm going to be taking it here to this vise.
So you had a quick question?
Okay, what's my question?
About the anvil, did the English settlers bring it with them, or did they use that to make these tools?
They want to know if they would bring the anvils with them when they came to the colonies.
Yes, they're going to definitely be bringing the anvils with them, at least initially, when they come into the colonies. The idea for the British government was that we call the process mercantilism today. The colonies provide raw materials. Those then get brought onto ships, sailed all the way across the Atlantic Ocean, and then those materials get produced into finished goods and products. They then would then sell those goods and products back across the ocean and sell them to the American colonists. Now, if we had a smith like this leaving Europe, he is going to bring the tools of his trade with him when he comes across the Atlantic Ocean. And that would, of course, include the anvil, the hammer, and some of the equipment that we've had for the forge.
All right, he's going to keep going. We'll save all questions for the end. Or if you want to put the questions in the chat, you are more than able to do that.
So there we go. You see I bent that over all the way.
Beautiful.
And now all I have to do is bend that part back, and we are done. Now this next part, I'm going to actually put it into the vise here, and I'm going to use the vise to help me actually straighten it back out. And there we go. Now the last thing I'm going to do is submerge it in water to cool it off. And I'm going to put it on the anvil here to allow it a chance to dry.
All right, well, they wanted to know what a lot of the other tools are.
Okay, so let's start with, we have our anvil here. As you saw, it's a vise. And right here, this is a lever. This is a simple machine, guys. So this is what's providing me that mechanical advantage to be able to close this in. And with basically using my tongs as a second lever, that was how I was able to move the metal about. So we have that. Now we've already hit the forge and the billows. Right by Emily's feet, I have my bucket and a pile of coal over there. That's my fuel. Then I have a series of different tongs that I used here to grab it. I also have a couple of different hammers, but this is the one I've been using primarily for this type of work. Now, in the forge itself, I have a couple of tools. I have the shovel that I've used. To help with the fuel. And as you can see, we ended up putting it back onto the fire a little too much. So when a piece of burning coal sat in it too long, it actually burned through a little bit of the bottom of it.
We also have our handy dandy fire extinguisher just in case.
That's modern. They would have used the bucket of water. I have a rake, which is used for raking and moving the coal. And I can also pull the fire out a little bit more if I need to. I also have a rod to be able to help make that hole that you saw earlier that I was using to heat the metal in. I actually used this to create that one little opening inside of everything to make a cavity. Now that is a lot of the tools that I'm basically using. I do have a few other specialty tools. I already mentioned the hot cut right here, which is a piece I can add onto my anvil for whichever way I need to cut what I'm working on. And then on the table here is mostly actually products that we've been making, but these are nail makers. Now there's a very specific kind of smith called a nailier whose job is to make nails. A blacksmith is more often going to be a repairman as much as anything else, but he can definitely make nails. Same metal that I was using earlier, but it would have gone into here. I would have popped it off and then hammered a shoulder onto the nail. Now, a smith can make several dozen, maybe even a couple hundred nails. A nailier with a specialized facility can make a couple of thousand nails in a day. So, if you need 3 nails to help put some paintings up or hang something up in your classroom, blacksmith. If you need to build a new house, nailier.
All right, any last questions for Mark?
They wanted to know how heavy the tools are.
How heavy are the tools?
Most of the tools here are only going to be a couple of pounds, with the exception being the anvil, which is several hundred pounds, or the forge itself, which is going to have a wide variety of ranges based on how heavy the forge and the materials that are being used for it are. But again, it and the anvil are going to be the 2 heaviest things. The hammer I've been using was probably the heaviest tool I actually wielded, and this is probably like 2 pounds, maybe 3.
Did the point at the end of the hook, does that just get nailed directly into wherever you're hanging it?
Yes. So if you saw over here, we have some of the same type of hooks holding up our stuff here. So the pointy part goes in here.
Yep.
And then the hook part comes out this way.
We also have ones on this post right here, hanging up these horseshoes, which is a relatively new hook right there. Again, smith would make a horseshoe. Farrier is the person who would actually be doing that most commonly, though.
Mm-hmm. All right, guys, we're going to pause for a second again to give Sam back the mic pack, and we'll be back in just a second.
Thank you.
Thank you.
a new material to North America, which was metal. And certainly that was the material for the tools that many Europeans had favored for hundreds and hundreds of years by the time they came to the New World. Certainly they're going to be trading those items with Eastern Woodland Indians as well. So many of these people are going to be very eager to replace their stone tools with iron and steel tools. Now, that's not to say that this doesn't work well. These perfectly sharp, perfectly good tools, the benefit in some instances is durability. So this can chip very easily, and that could cause it to lose sharpness or break entirely. The same thing with an axe, same thing with your arrowheads. The benefit to iron and steel, far more durable. It'll last a lot longer. And I don't know about you, but I would rather just use one tool for a very long time rather than have to repeatedly remake my tools. So these will make Eastern Woodland Indians' lives a whole heck of a lot easier. The same could be said for some of the tools that we're showing you here. So the other one, very popular tool, Tomahawk. These ones made out of iron and steel. So commonly, what Mark would do as a blacksmith, he would make most of this out of iron, which would be a cheaper material, and then steel, which has carbon, like he said, he would make a steel bit and weld that into the end. So the real expensive material just on the end of the weapon or the tool, the rest would be made out of iron. So that's helpful with cost. Other items that are being traded with Eastern Woodland Indians, things like this, commonly this is called sort of a scalping knife, but it's just basic trade knife. Again, just something that's going to make their lives a little bit easier. The things that Eastern Woodland Indians are trading to Europeans for all these new technologies and ideas, commonly things like this. This is a beaver pelt. Europeans really like beaver for the fur, so it's sort of hard to see, but think about beavers reasonably. They have to be in the water a lot, so their fur has this very sort of thick woolly layer that's very waterproof. Europeans are going to like that a lot for what I have on my head, hats. So this one is made out of wool felt, not real great. You see how it sags a little bit over time. Every time it gets rained on, it sort of gets a little bit less shaped or well-shaped. But if you make a hat like this out of beaver fur, after you shave that fur and turn it into felt, it'll actually keep its shape a lot longer, which is very appealing. So Europeans are trading for beaver fur, but also other pelts like deer. One of the most popular items for men in Virginia were leather breeches. They were sort of treated like the Carhartts of the 18th century. So very commonly, Europeans are going and hunting for deer, but they are also trading quite a bit for stacks and stacks of deer pelts that would then get shipped to Ireland, made into leather breeches, and then shipped back to the colonies and sold in that mercantile system. But so you can see this buckskin make really good durable pants, pretty comfy. They were almost sort of like the yoga pants of the 18th century as well, in that they were really sort of stretchy and tightly fitted, and that's apparently what most of the men like to wear. So all of these are important tools. They're tools that Europeans will use as well, along with some of the things we see over here. So the big new technology that Europeans bring to North America, of course, is going to be the firearm. Firearms are going to make your hunting and your fighting as well, in a certain sense, a lot easier. The big difficulty that many people have with bows and arrows is one, a question of range. A lot of these Eastern Woodland Indian bows, they can get a good distance, but they're never going to get as far as a gun in a lot of cases. But the other thing to consider is that when you're shooting with a bow, you have to think about parabolic arcs, or think about how gravity is playing on your shot. So if I'm aiming at a target with a bow, I can't, unless it's very close by, I can't aim directly at the target. I have to aim up with the intent knowing that my arrow is going to go up a bit and then come down a bit towards my target. So you sort of have to understand that, and it comes with a lot of practice. The distinction being, now certainly aiming is a factor with a rifle like this, but in theory, what I point at is what I'm going to shoot. So in a certain way, it's a lot more sort of dummy-proof, which is really great for a lot of these Europeans. When you talk about firearms in Virginia, it was also a legal requirement. So every able-bodied white man who wasn't Catholic between the ages of 18 and 60 was required by law to own a firearm in Virginia in what was called the militia system. So that's a word that gets thrown out a little bit. These days, people talk about militia and what that means. In the 18th century, or the colonial period like we're talking about, what the militia was really doing was protecting the colony at large. So Virginia was a British colony, loyal to the King of England. King of England certainly wants this area protected. What he doesn't want to do is pay soldiers to have a standing army here in Virginia. That'd be way too much of a cost to the crown. So instead, by making every able-bodied man own their own gun, you've turned them into sort of part-time soldiers. So every man had to have a gun. Usually it had to be a gun well fitted with a bayonet. So like this musket over here, if it takes a bayonet right on top, effectively what you've done, you've turned it into a spear as well as a gun, which can be beneficial. This is more of a professional soldier's gun. You have other guns that you'll see as well. Some guns, like this one over here, this is what's called a fowler. You can see it's a good bit thinner. The barrel's not quite as big, just less robust. A fowler, F-O-W-L-E-R, would mean bird gun. Today we think about that as a shotgun. So that'd be pretty typical for most farmers to just own a simple fowler like this. They were really cheap. You could go to any store in Virginia and purchase one for not all that much money. But some people certainly might also have something like this, a musket or a professional soldier's gun. You can see this is much more big and robust. Really, it's designed to take the wear and tear that a soldier would put on a gun. The other gun that I have here, the one that I'm holding, this is a professional hunter's gun, a specialty gun called a rifle. So what that means, as opposed to these ones that have smooth barrels, just smooth tubes on the inside, this one has rifling. It has grooves going down the inside of the barrel that when it's fired would cause the ball to spin. Think about how a quarterback throws a football, making this gun much more accurate, much more effective for hunting and getting my target. So these guns may be accurate to about 100 yards, the length of a football field. This one could be accurate to over 300 yards. So very good chance that I'm going to hit my target. All of these are guns that you could own for militia service. It just depends upon really what you're doing on the side. If you're doing a lot of hunting, or if you lived out on the frontier like we're at here in the Valley of Virginia, very likely you might own a rifle. If you lived back towards Williamsburg and Richmond and you just had to own it to keep some critters out of your crops, and perhaps to just for your militia service, a cheap fowler would be fine. These rifles are much more expensive. Beyond your gun, you had to own a few other things. As I said, edged weapon. So sometimes that's a well-fitted bayonet. Other times, things like I have here, or like we have on the table, tomahawks, sometimes just knives, or at times, even useful tools like this, a sword. This is a French sword, what's called a hanger. So swords not really commonly used in North America by the time of the French and Indian and Revolutionary War. Mostly being used to show rank and status. So that's the kind of sword that a sergeant would carry. So he's sort of a mid-level in command. Higher in command, captains and colonels would have a much sort of fancier sword than what you had here. So it really just sort of depended. Often those were just symbols of rank. Another weapon, which at one point was used quite a bit, think about the 1600s and the 1500s. This is what's called a halberd. So it's a combination axe and spear. By the time that we're talking about in the colonial period in the 1700s, these weren't really being used anymore. The only time these were being used were, again, for sergeants to try to show status. The idea being, if a sergeant is in command of a group of guys, you want him to be focusing on commanding those guys. So you don't want him bothering to load and fire a gun. He'll just carry a more ceremonial weapon like this. But so these are all tremendously important weapons. By the time of the Revolutionary War, both your Eastern Woodland Indians and your Europeans are all going to have a high number of firearms. Americans have some weird firearms, a lot of rifles and things like that. Your standard British soldier would have had a musket like the one we have here, which each has some benefits and some drawbacks, as we said. Musket certainly much less accurate, but my rifle will take much longer to load, which you'll see here in a minute when we go ahead and shoot these. But before we do that, any questions, anything y'all are curious about anything you've seen thus far?
Yeah, any questions, you guys?
What accident
No
did they wear, like...
Sorry, hold. What, Marley?
Did they, Are those like the clothing that they killed to like put the things on?
I don't know what you're talking
I might need you to tell me what she said, Miss Teacher.
about. Did they bring the guns over? Did they make them in the colony?
Did they bring the guns over, or did they also make them in the colonies?
That's a great question. The answer is both. So for soldiers' guns like this, like the musket, these were being made for British muskets like this, what was called a brown bess, being made at two places. They were being made at the Tower of London in England, so it was a government manufacturing point and armory. The other place was Dublin Castle in Ireland, another British government manufacturing point. So those very specifically made in one spot. Other muskets, so the French use muskets as well. Those are made in a few different factories in France. So those would have been usually issued to soldiers, and then the soldiers are coming over. At other times, so like during the French and Indian War, King George is going to send muskets to the colonies for their defense. Those muskets would be sent to Williamsburg and stored at a big octagonal building called the Public Magazine, sort of an armory in the center of town. For your Fowlers, very commonly, those were being mass-produced in factories in England and in the Netherlands, and then shipped over to the colonies where they could be bought at any store, just like you buy a shotgun at Walmart today. The difference is this gun, the rifle. So rifling, that technology we talked about, was initially a German idea. German rifles, pretty squat, short little things, but very effective guns. German gunsmiths started coming over to the colonies to live here and brought that technology with them. We're Americans, so everything needs to be bigger and better. So what they did is they took some of the styles of the Fowler and made their rifles to match it. So big, long guns like this. So this is more of an American technology, if you sort of want to call it that. But these were more specifically being made here in the colonies by small artisan gunsmiths who would just make one at a time. And that's part of the reason these were so expensive. You could go to any store and buy one of those very cheaply. You could buy 8 to 10 of those Fowlers for the cost of a rifle like this, because for this you had to go specifically to a gunsmith and order it, and then he'd spend several hundred hours turning those raw materials, iron sheets, big blocks of wood, into this finished product. So there's a little bit of both. Any other questions?
They also wanted to know if you guys killed the animals that the axes are on, or like where you got them.
They want to know if we were the ones who killed and skinned these animals, or if we got them from somewhere else.
Yeah, that's a good question. I know I wasn't, and Mark and Emily were not either. I don't know exactly where some of these came from. Very likely these were donated to the museum, so we didn't actually sort of do the hard work. We did do the hard work of taking the fur off of this and turning it into buckskin. So this is a process. It's a little bit gross, but every animal has enough brains to tan its own hide. So you basically soak the hide in brain juice, which makes it nice and soft and supple like this.
So we will do a lot of making our own buckskin here at the museum, but we do not personally kill any of the animals.
Yeah, quite frankly, I'm not a very good shot. I'd probably miss. Talking a little bit more about militia, like I said, the idea with your militia is if every able-bodied white man in Virginia has a gun, has an edged weapon, has ammunition, in the case of an emergency, like an attack from the French, like an attack from various eastern woodland Indians that aren't really happy that Europeans are here, or perhaps a revolt from the enslaved population in Virginia, the idea is that this government-regulated body, the militia, will all gather together at their local courthouse and then go off to fight or address whatever concern that might be. So this is a kind of complex system, but it's important to note that that was a government-regulated system. It was regulated by militia law, and if you didn't have these things, if you didn't have the necessary things you needed, you could get in trouble with the colony, you could get all sorts of fines or different punishments as a result of that. But very important system. This militia system will be what starts off with the Revolutionary War, your initial guys at Lexington and Concord, places like Bunker Hill, pretty much all militia. Same thing for times in Virginia. So what we're going to do now, Mark's going to come on back in. We're going to take a try at shooting some of these guns. So Mark is going to be shooting the musket here. That's the smoothbore quick loading weapon. I'm going to be shooting the rifle. So I'm going to go a little bit behind him. in theory, now neither one of us practices all that much, but in theory, he should be able to load and fire his musket much quicker than I should be able to load and fire my rifle. If he was a British soldier, he'd be able to load and fire about 4 times a minute or every 15 seconds. We don't get that time that quickly today because we don't practice all the time. For me with my rifle, maybe I'd be lucky to load once or twice a minute. It's a much tighter fitted ball. But we're going to give it a minute or two and we're going to see how many rounds we can get through. So, load and fire in your own time, Mark. So he's reaching into his cartridge box and pulling out a pre-made paper cartridge. That's what soldiers are commonly using. I'm using that today as well. So this is a paper cartridge filled with gunpowder. Normally with rifles, you might load out of a powder horn like the one on my side. Cartridges are just a little bit safer. So he's pouring the rest of that powder down into the barrel. He poured a little bit into his pan as a primer. He then needs to pack all of that round down into his gun. He's using a ramrod to do so. So the benefit to his musket, again, nice smooth barrel. That musket ball and that round should go right down the barrel. Fire in your own time. As easy as
Fire.
That's not good. Mark has a misfire. I think I'm going to beat him on the first round. He got that one off. Now his speed should come into play. I have the advantage of range. He has the advantage of speed.
Pretty loud, huh?
We thought it'd be a lot louder in person, but they like how the smoke comes off of it.
Yeah, it is definitely louder in person. I can definitely attest to that.
Okay. So my gun is loaded in a similar way to Mark today. More commonly, I would be using a patched ball as opposed to a cartridge. But we use cartridges again here at the museum just for safety.
As you saw, I had a misfire on that one, and I'm still keeping up a little bit faster than Sam.
Yeah. The thing you see with these guns in general, the gunpowder, the black powder we're using, mixture of sulfur, saltpeter, and charcoal, very dirty substance as it burns. It leaves a lot of grime on the guns and inside the barrel. It also, to a certain extent, will cause misfires and stuff like that to happen just as everything sort of gets gummed up. Fire and load one more time.
Last round. Fire and load. On your command.
Fire! So that should give you a good feel for a little bit of how these guns would be loaded and fired. Again, Mark has a tremendous advantage in speed. In theory, if we're opposing forces on a field, I have a lot more range, which is great. What he will often do is run and advance very quickly on me, close the distance so that my range doesn't matter, and then he'll beat me on how quickly he can reload. But again, my gun is more specifically for hunting. The idea being, oh yeah, and then he'll fix a bayonet, and then I'm going to have a really bad day. But the idea for my gun, really, this is meant for range and also for hunting. In a farming setting, if I'm off hunting deer in the woods, if I miss the first time, it doesn't really matter if I can load quickly because the deer will be gone by the time I've reloaded. But so just different guns for different uses. The last thing we're going to do, we're going to do one of Virginian's most favorite pastimes, and we're going to try to throw some tomahawks today. There are very great accounts from the beginning of the Revolutionary War when there were a bunch of soldiers in Williamsburg that they very constantly would take their tomahawks and throw them at doors. And usually the people that owned those doors were not really happy about it. Now, I'm not a very good tomahawk thrower, and Mark isn't a tremendously good one either, but I think we're each going to attempt a couple throws just to see how we can do, see if we can stick one or two. Don't get your hopes up, though. See if I can give this a try. Haven't done this in a long time. Nope, no luck there. A little bit low.
Almost. So close.
Yeah, this is not necessarily my best skill. Oh, that was awful. Well, I've got one last one to try. See if I can save my pride. I don't know if I can. See if I can get this one out of the scabbard first. There we go.
Wish them luck, guys. Ah, so
I guess
close.
I've got to give a little bit more practice as a frontiersman. But that's all we have for you today. Any questions, anything y'all are curious about? I'm very happy to answer anything that you might be wondering about.
Any questions, guys?
They're curious about the axe throwing. She wanted to know how you train to do it. You just keep practicing?
They want to know how you train to throw the tomahawks. Do you just keep practicing?
Yeah, that's exactly what it is, and I just don't have a lot of practice.
Like every skill, you have to practice.
Yeah, so that's what we see is a lot of these guys that were in Williamsburg right as the Revolutionary War started, before they marched up to Boston to join the Continental Army, were just chilling in Williamsburg. A bunch of young dudes needed something to do, so they'd commonly find a really nice red door and then use that for tomahawk practice. A lot of the townspeople didn't like that, though.
Any
So
more
what was
questions?
their purpose, though? Did they do it to kill animals, or they just did it for sport?
Did they do it to kill animals or did they do it for sport?
With tomahawks, mostly for sport, and then the idea that a lot of those guys had is that if they get into close combat fighting, they're just going to throw their tomahawk. Problem with that, as you saw, after I throw it, then I don't have a tomahawk. And if I missed a lot right there, now I'm in trouble. So not necessarily the best tactic, right, to throw your weapon away, but it's something that all these young Virginian dudes thought they were going to do. They thought they were going to find a red coat and just walk. In practice, most of the time they saw a red coat and then they ran the other way.
Any more questions?
So between the two guns, one was supposed to be an English colonist, or were they both the colony, or was one supposed to be the English and then the other was the colonist?
Were both the guns from the same place, or was one supposed to be from the English and one was supposed to be from the colonists?
Yeah, so the gun that Mark fired, the musket, as I said, that is a British Brown Bess. That's a gun that would have been produced at the Tower of London, issued to British soldiers, or shipped here to the colonies. So that's a soldier's gun through and through. The gun that I was using, the rifle, this is a gun that would have been made by artisan German gunsmiths here in Virginia or in Pennsylvania. So this is one that were commonly made in the colonies.
So
Good
then,
question.
during the American Revolution, did they have both types of guns to fight the British?
During the American Revolution, did they have both types of guns to fight the British?
Excellent. Yes, they did. So the big problem, right, early on, the British are definitely not going to give you guns to fight against them. So the rebel forces or the patriot forces are going into places like the Public Magazine that I mentioned in Williamsburg, which was the storehouse for all the colonies' guns, and taking out and using as many guns as they can. Problem, never enough. There were several thousand maybe when you look at all the colonies, but not enough for the Continental Army. So a lot of the early soldiers in the Continental Army are having to bring their guns from home, their fowlers and their rifles. The difficulty with that is that if I'm George Washington's quartermaster, so the person that was responsible for supplying all the troops, I can't just issue standard ammunition of to every man, because all the guns might take different size ball, might have different caliber. That's one of the real benefits to muskets. Those all, each musket that the British government made, they were all 75 caliber, shooting a 69 caliber ball. So every single man could get issued the exact same ammunition, as opposed to these guys, which often would have to make their own ammunition, which is not good. Over time, during the Revolutionary War, what the United States does, they form an alliance with France and another one with Spain, but mostly from France. They're purchasing all sorts of things. They're purchasing swords like this, sometimes just getting them for free, but they're also purchasing French muskets called Charlevilles, and those are being shipped by the end of the war. About 200,000 of them had been shipped to North America.
Any more questions?
They wanted to know if the outfits are hard to walk in.
They want to know if your outfits are hard to walk in.
It's a good question. Mark, I'll let you go first.
So the easy answer is not particularly. For my clothes, for walking in this, it feels a lot like wearing a stiff pair of jeans. That's pretty much what we wear all the time. And so, no, for walking, it's not much of a big deal. For me, because I'm in this nice wool coat, I don't lift my arms quite as well as I would otherwise, but I can still do so. So I still have pretty much the same range of motion that you guys do, but I'm mostly wearing civilian clothes, so I'm wearing stuff that you would be using for everyday life, not stuff that you'd be wearing for strenuous activity.
Yeah, Mark is very much dressed in a European fashion. I'm dressed as a Virginian, very much a frontiersman. So as I said, from the waist down, I'm dressed in what's called Indian dress. So I'm wearing leggings. These are just made out of wool cloth. These would protect my legs from getting cut up on the brush here in North America, which is really great. I'm wearing moccasins. These are made out of black tanned buckskin. The benefit to these, if I'm hunting, just a thin layer of buckskin between me and the ground. I'm not making a lot of noise as I move. I can also feel if there was a stick on the ground. I don't want to snap that stick. A deer will hear it and run away. I can feel the stick before I snap it and step off of it, which is very good. The weird thing about my dress, obviously, is I'm not wearing pants. Eastern Woodland Indians didn't like pants, and the Virginians that were living on the frontier and fighting with those Eastern Woodland Indians realized that, all sorts of things can go wrong with pants. As you're moving around, you can rip a seam, they can fall down, which is not good. So this is just a thin strip of cloth covering all the essential bits and held up with a belt. This allows me a lot more movement in the woods, which is great. From the waist up, I'm wearing a waistcoat and a shirt just like Mark is, similar. The other different thing I'm wearing what's called a hunting shirt over the top. So sort of a big overshirt made out of a material called linsey woolsey, very nice and warm. It's made a mixture of linen and wool. This will protect my good clothes when I'm out hunting, and it also sort of becomes a status symbol. If you wore one of these and had a bucktail in your cap, usually it meant frontier.
All right. Any last questions, you guys?
I got one. The shorts count. The dude in the red shirt jacket was all of their stuff there before they went there? It was all like things that.
We'll talk about it later, Marley. Can you guys say thank you?
Thank
you so much.
Say thank you. All right, guys, signing off. The rest of your day.
Thank you, guys.
Come on, let's go down the bus, y'all.
Yep.
I want to see that's the Marley.
Hey, where are you at?
Thanks, Miss Bailey.